Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Jazakallahu khairan for joining us, brothers, sisters, and friends. Thank you very much. And let's just do a quick sanity check. Everything looks like it's working from my end. So I hope you guys are good. Ramadan Mubarak, by the way. This is our first session in Ramadan. So do forgive me if my throat starts to get a little bit dry. So I'm actually excited about today's session, inshallah, because we're going to move on now from all of the abstract stuff. So we spent the first weekend talking about the characteristics and methodology of dawah, what your mindset should be, what your approach should be, how do you engage with other people, and then we spent last weekend discussing epistemology, scientism, and other aspects of logic, argumentation, and things like that. So inshallah, this week we will be putting all of those into practice and actually coming together to formulate our first argument for the divine reality, which of course is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, here we go. And as for why it's called the divine reality, well, this is the beginner level that we're going to be going through, but hopefully inshallah by the end of this that you'll see the argument culminate in the necessary existence of some divine entity that had to bring everything else into reality, which is why we call that the divine reality. Of course, we know that as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but that's then from scripture, which we'll come to next week, inshallah. So, without further ado, or actually one point to mention as well. So I want to mention this at the off, just in case I forget to mention it later. This is a point that Brother Hamza reminded me to mention as well, that to ensure that whilst we are going through this argument today, and inshallah by the end of today, you will be able to robustly explain to literally anyone, of the necessity of there to be a divine reality for God's existence. I prefer to use the term divine reality rather than God, because God is a loaded term. It means different things to different people. But ultimately, for us as Muslims, we, as well as using this to explain to people from the intellect perspective. Again, remember, this is now just targeting the intellect, the argumentation, giving reasons to believe. At the end of the day, hidayah comes from the heart as well. Remember the very first session. Your job is only to convey, not to convince, and it still comes from the heart. You still need to reach the person. But as Brother Hamza mentioned, in fact, actually, do you know what? I'm actually going to play his voice note. I'm sure he wouldn't mind. I'm actually going to play his voice note so you can hear it from the man himself. So I hope this works.
Bro, don't forget to remind people that all these abstract arguments, for them to understand that they're here to worship Allah, to know Him, to love Him, to obey Him, and to direct and single out all acts of worship to Him alone. Do you know what I mean?
Okay, so essentially, yeah, the more knowledge that we have, this should actually make us better Muslims and make us more conscious of to whom we belong and to whom we return, and make us more conscious about our ibadah, about our worship, especially in this month now being the month of Ramadan. And I remind myself before I remind everyone else of this. Okay, Assalamu alaikum guys, Jazakallah khair. Right, okay, so with that said, let's begin. Bismillah. So we're going to actually spend most of our time on this very first slide. Oh, actually, do you know what? I don't know if you guys heard that properly because I didn't switch off the mic, but khalas. Okay, I'm sure you guys understood what he said. Right, okay, so this argument is going to take place in the form of 5 questions, okay? Again, you don't need to write these questions down because I'll make the slides available as soon as this video is up on YouTube. But this is, to set the scene, there are 5 basic questions, okay? So, question number 1. Is our universe real? Now, it doesn't have to be worded, you don't have to say our universe, you can say our reality, but basically the state of existence that we're in, is it real? Okay. Now, I don't want you guys to get hung up on the semantics here, because some different people, they'll try and tie you up with semantics. But what you have to understand here is, first and foremost, the structure of the question. Okay, how many potential answers are there to this question? Think about that for a second. So write your answers in the comments while you think about that. How many potential answers are there? And if you can, give me those potential answers. and whilst I'm waiting for you guys to do that, let me explain. So the question is not necessarily about the universe, because they might say, well, it's the reality and how do you define real and this, that, and the other. We'll come to that too. Okay, excellent, excellent. I was going to say you've done this before, but I haven't. I don't think so. I mean, I haven't done this course on the channel before, but yeah, excellent. There are two answers, yes and no. There are another two answers that people will sometimes give, which is maybe and I don't know. Okay, so technically speaking, there are four potential answers. So yes, no, maybe, and I don't know, right? Now, here's the thing. Do we care about the maybes and do we care about the I don't knows? No, we don't, because that is purely a subjective position, right? That just means that the person who is answering has no idea. They're unsure of which of the two. It doesn't mean that there's more possibilities. It's still yes or no, because our reality, it's either real or it's not. However we define real to be, but it's either real or it's not, right? It can't be a mixture of the two. It's one or it's other. Exactly. Appealing to ignorance is not the answer. So when they say yes or no, pick one. Or if they don't even want to pick one, explore both options. Okay. Again, this was the process of deduction that we went through, that you start off with all potential possibilities. And the only possibility here is yes or no. So this is why the question is worded in a very particular way. Okay, the question is worded in a very particular way that it yields only a yes or a no answer. There has to be a commitment one way or another way. Is our universe real? Is our reality real? And what do we mean by real? So real basically means a state of existence. Okay, hold on. Let's put that. So we've got yes or no, right? Okay. So real, we're going to go with a state of existence by which you are bound by the consequences of whatever happens there. So, for example, video games are not real. I mean, the video game itself is real, but the worlds and whatever have you, it's digital. It's not real. So, inside of a video game, or inside of a dream, or within the confines of a movie. Obviously, when they're filming the movie, that's in reality. But the movie itself, it's set in in an entirely fictional reality. So whatever happens there is not real, because there's nothing binding within our realities, so to speak. Okay, understand this point, that it can be real within inside the confines of the game or the movie. It's real for them because, for the characters involved, it's a binding consequence for them. But as soon as you're outside of that reality here, where we experience everything, because we experience the movie just by watching it, or the game just by watching it. We don't live inside of it. Even with virtual reality, you could argue, you're still not inside of it. You're still just experiencing it from the outside. So the reality is anything that happens where we are bound by the consequence. So, for example, could we, in a video game or in a movie, you might jump off a building, no problem, special effects, whatever have you. Or in a video game, you just, if you die, you just hit reset. You could commit all sorts of acts and behaviors that would be fatal or severely, punishing in real life. So the point here being not to get hung up in semantics, but to understand that there is a difference between our reality, that which we're engaged in, we live in, and we're bound by, and the realities that we can create inside of video games, movies, fictional, scenarios, whatever have you. So the question is this reality that we're in, is it real? Because some wacko weirdos will come up and say, oh, well, we're just living in a simulation, which raises other questions, right? Anyway, so the question is yes or no. Now, if someone was to say no, so, okay, this is how the deduction works. Remember how the deductive argument works, that we eliminate all of the implausible options until we're left with basically what has to be the truth. So even if the person who you're speaking to doesn't know, whatever have you, well, let's just say no. If they say, right, our universe is not real, then fine, challenge them. Would they consider jumping off a bridge, or would they walk into traffic? Would they do something that we wouldn't think twice about doing inside of a video game, but in reality, in our state of existence, we would be hesitant to? And if they're going to be hesitant to, they're going to recognize that there is a difference. And being as there is a difference, regardless of the words on their lips, their actions will demonstrate that actually, no, they consider the state of existence that we're in to be real, to be something that they're going to be bound by. whatever happens in this world, if they get injured or whatever have you, that's something that they're going to have to live with, that they can never escape. Okay, so again, we're talking about raising the intellectual price tag here for someone to really, hold on to this position that our universe is just not real. Ask them to explain it. Where is this basis coming from? They can't just go to the narrowest option or even play devil's advocate here, because you have to go with the option that is the most plausibly true. So if someone here wants to literally argue that their universe is not real, they also, don't forget, there comes in conversations also a breakaway point, where there's no point discussing something because someone clearly just wants to, they're not interested in the truth. They just want to, stick to a nonsensical position just for the sake of sticking to a nonsensical position. And at that point, you've won the argument. You've raised the intellectual price tag to the point where the person now denies reality. Also here, because we mentioned it's a scientific perspective, from a scientific perspective, we have to consider as an axiom, as a foregone belief, as something that you just accept without question, that our state of existence is real. Because if from a scientific perspective we couldn't even establish that our reality is real, then it makes any kind of endeavor to investigate the natural world completely futile and pointless. There's absolutely no point. Like to deny reality is to deny science in and of itself. So no person who claims to be a person who follows science would ever say that our universe is not real, because there's just no basis on which to say so. So we can cut out the answer no. Therefore, the answer to this question has to be yes. Now, why are we starting at this question first? This question, first and foremost, is you'll see how the questions lead up. Okay, so that we're starting literally at rock bottom here, just to establish base principles. In reality, whenever I'm talking to someone, I actually don't start at question 1. I'll start at question 3, because questions 1 and 2, which we'll come to now, are implicitly understood, but I'm just giving you the full argument for the sake of completeness. With experience, you will learn, where you can start your conversation off from. And, if you have to go down a few rungs on the ladder, so be it. But this is essentially the bottom rung of the ladder. There's nowhere else you can go. I suppose, a rung before this is to presume that your own faculties of reasoning and intellect actually work. But then if someone was to say, well, they don't work, I mean, by necessity, they would have to be working for them to have understood the point that you're making. So there is one more bottom rung, but it's like so low that I can't, it's not even worth putting here. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Don't forget, guys, to stop me if none of this is making any sense to you, or if I'm going too fast. Because, like I said in the very first session, my objective here is to make sure that you guys understand this. So I don't want to be talking at you where you guys just take my word for it. If you feel that there's some gap there or something that you're not quite getting, again, feel absolutely free to ask questions and stop me there and then. Okay, right. So the answer to this question has to be question number 1: is our universe real? Or however you want to word it, is our state of existence real? Or however, the wording itself is not important. The way that you phrase the question is important, though, to make sure there's only the yes or no answer. So the answer to that has to be yes. This is real as far as we're concerned. Okay, so now that we've established that it must be real, question number 2: did it have a beginning? And again, think about this. There's, again, how many options? Yes, no. We will, maybe, and I don't know. We can reject those because they don't change the reality of whether it began to exist or not. And with regards to it beginning, again, it's a hard cutoff. Either our reality began or it didn't begin. There's no in between, like, oh, it partially began or not. If there was if there was a point where there was non-existence and now there's existence, that is a beginning. So, did our reality have a beginning? Yes or no? Again, the same 2 options. Now, again, let's explore the option if they say no. Okay, because at one point this was a popular position to take. Okay, now, so if someone says that our reality did not begin, understand what that means. If our reality did not begin, I mean, it's here now. Okay, obviously. If it did not begin, that means that it existed for all time. Literally, that our reality is just perpetual. It was always here. Maybe not in this state, maybe not in this composition, but in terms of the reality, in terms of the matter, in terms of literally space, it was always here. That some people can argue that, or they used to choose to argue that. But even now, from a let's just go with some scientific perspective first, some physical evidence, and then we'll go into the logical evidence as well. So the example of the Big Bang. What is the Big Bang? The Big Bang was, if you guys remember from an earlier session, I think it was last week, when we were discussing the expansion of the universe, which was observed by Edwin Hubble, who noticed the redshift. So we have literal physical evidence of the universe expanding. Now, if you rewind time, obviously everything starts to contract, and they must come to a point where everything met and was in a singular point and could not contract anymore. And that's basically time zero, right? So the Big Bang is when everything, all of matter, all of existence was confined in this one, and they'll say infinitesimally small, but there has to be a value, was confined in this very, very small space and then exploded, and basically, this is the result of our universe. Okay? The point being that when you rewind time back, there has to be, there's obviously a point where everything meets, and you can't go further than that. Once everything is met and you have that crunch, you can't keep going further back because there's nowhere else for further to go. Now, to try and escape this, some scientists used to posit that, okay, the universe is a wave. It contracts and expands and contracts and expands. Again, there's no physical evidence of this. This is just, wishful thinking to try and escape the problem of there actually being some kind of an absolute beginning. But there was a very famous quote from some cosmologists a few years ago where they basically said that, no, all of these are just nonsensical, that we actually now have to deal with some kind of a cosmic beginning. Okay, so the Big Bang in and of itself demonstrates that there was a beginning to our reality. Heat death. The term that I forgot, I think that was last week as well, entropy. Entropy. Okay, so what is heat death? The heat death of the universe is such that the nature of our universe is such that all of the matter and all of the particles in our universe, they are reacting to certain things, and things are happening that is causing matter to be spread out. Okay, so just to give you a brief history of what's going to happen in the future is, our sun, for example, which is a star, it's burning out energy, and at some point it will start to lose its mass when it's burnt out enough energy, which means because it's losing mass, it's going to lose its gravitational pull, which means which is keeping it relatively small. So it's going to start to expand. It's going to start consuming all of the planets, that's within it. It's basically just going to then explode, scatter matter throughout the universe. Maybe some other galaxies and other systems will form, and maybe this process will repeat over and over and over and over and over again. But at some point, all of the reactions will cease and everything will stop, and all matter and all movement, etc., will just stop. And that's what's called the heat death of the universe, when everything just basically stops and time stops and the universe essentially ceases to be a living thing. Which is completely, from the Islamic perspective, this is the end of this reality for us, and there's another reality to come. That's no problem for us. But the point being, from a scientific perspective, the heat death of the universe is a known predicted thing. If this reality was eternal in the past, then the heat death would already have taken place. We would already be dead. Does that make sense? Okay, so if you want to think about it like in the state of, like, say, for example, a sandcastle, we're in the state of the universe now where everything is like nice formed. We have life, we have planets, we have solar systems, whatever have you. So imagine like a sandcastle on the beach. If you were to come along and you see the sandcastle on the beach, you know that sandcastle had to have been constructed relatively recently, because if not, it already would have decayed and died. And it's the same with our reality as well. It's the same with the universe, that if it was, if it existed eternally in the past, it would already be dead at this point in time. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Big Bang standard mode has some supporting evidence for the beginning of the universe. I mean, not only that, that's what the cosmologists say. They basically, in fact, I can show you the slide. It's in the advanced session right now. What is the quote? The quote is, let me see. I do have it. Oh wait, that's the argument from the fitra. That's why I can't find it. Here we go. Right, there you go. So the bottom quote here, it said that an argument is what convinces reasonable men, and proof is what it takes to convince even an unreasonable man. With the proof now in place, cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. There is no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. This is Alexander Vilenkin in his book Many Worlds in One, where there was actually two other cosmologists, Bord and Guth as well, that co-authored this. So this is from 2006. So really, people don't have any room, from the cosmologist's perspective now to argue against an actual beginning of the universe. And again, we also have the fallacy of an infinite history of events. So if the universe did exist eternally in the past, every event that's occurring now would have a precursor event, would have a precursor, which means that the arrow of time, in order to reach us now, would have to have traveled over an infinite number of events, which is impossible. It's like, can you count to infinity? You can't count to infinity. Now, there's an unlimited set of numbers, and you can just keep counting and counting and counting, but can you reach the point where you've actually achieved infinity? No, because at any point along that counting scale, wherever that arrow is, whatever you've reached, you've still reached a specific, no matter how big it is, a specific finite number at which you can determine how far you've come along. So there is no point, even in terms of counting, that you can reach where you can actually say, well, actually, no, we've actually reached the point of infinity now. So again, even just from a logical perspective, it makes absolutely no sense in a causal universe where cause and effect, in this history of events, for there to be an eternal past. So from a scientific perspective, from a logical perspective, there is no argument to be made that the universe has an eternal beginning. Umarwani, Jazakallah khairan for joining us. So I hope that makes sense. So the answer to this question, did it have a beginning? Did it begin to exist? Did our reality begin to exist? Must be yes, because there's no room for anyone to argue, no, it can't. Okay? So now that we've established that it must be yes, third question. Again, notice all the questions are formatted in the same way. It's a yes or no response. So it had a beginning. Did it have a cause? As in, was there some external, not even external, was there a factor? Was there something that outside of it that instigated that beginning to happen? Okay, so did it have a cause? Again, there's only how many possible answers? Two possible answers, yes or no. So let's, again, deductive process where we will eliminate the implausible. So let's go with no first. If we just explore no, because obviously if we say yes, that's where we want to go. But let's explore no. Okay, so if they're saying that our reality began, but there was absolutely no cause. I mean, first of all, from a scientific perspective, that would be an extraordinary claim, because that would be the very first instance of something happening where there was no, where they specifically said there is no cause to be attributed. Now, as well as the logical fallacy of, trying to assert a negative, right, which we covered, I think, in the first session. So this time last week, in the first session of epistemology, first of all, they can't even prove that there was literally nothing there. At best, there may be a cause, but we can't detect it. That's what they can say at best, but they can't assert that there was nothing there, because there's always the possibility that there was a cause just beyond their detection, right? So first of all, you can't logically prove a negative, so that they can never prove that there was no cause. But even then, from a scientific perspective, to accept something happening without any cause defeats the whole point and basis of science, the purpose of which is to provide an explanation. Now, if you start engaging and considering and accepting scenarios where things just happen and they just happen for absolutely no reason, you literally just undermined the entire scientific process. You literally just have to pack your bags and go home, because now you can use that as an answer for pretty much anything. Why does it happen? Why does XYZ happen? Oh, it just happens just by itself. There's absolutely no reason for it to happen. The whole point of science is to find out what is the reason, what is the cause. So, from a scientific perspective, a scientist could never argue that, no, it happened without any cause. There has to be some kind of a causal reason there. Okay, so how can something come from nothing as well? That's just a logical point, that when you have absolutely nothing, how do you get, our reality, all of the matter, just have a look at the size of the solar system, and there's some videos on YouTube, just have a look at some of those on the size of cosmological bodies, and you just begin to realize how small of a speck we are in this giant universe, and they want to basically attribute that everything literally just came from absolutely nothing. And even then, to be created, right, for our reality to be created, I mean, nothingness in and of itself has no ability to create, right? Now, it would be one thing if they just argued that maybe, reality was in one form and then it was changed to another, and that just happened by itself. But literally to create out of, and I don't want to say thin air, but you know what I mean, right? Because obviously, no existence, there's no air, there's no vacuum, there's literally no space, there's literally nothingness. I know that's it's a very hard concept to understand, right? What we mean by literal nothingness. When we're talking about literal nothingness, we're not talking about empty space. We're literally talking like there's no space, right? There's no vacuum, there's no space, there is literally nothing, just blank, right? Because even space is something, it's physical, it's a size, you can walk through it, it's celestial, we're floating in space. Space is a thing, right? Even the vacuum of space, it's a thing. We're talking about literal nothingness, and literal nothingness, the absence of anything, has no ability to create. This is an extraordinary claim, and for anyone to make this claim, they would have to provide some kind of an extraordinary proof for this to be the case, right? And logical necessity doesn't fit here. They could argue, well, okay, logical necessity, because we have to explain it. That would only fit if you were trying to argue naturalism as a default, which you couldn't. Basically meaning that everything has to have some kind of a natural cause, and it wouldn't work there. How about the bootstrap example atheists use, like someone pulling themselves up by their own bootstrap? Again, yeah, it's physically impossible. You literally cannot pull yourself up by your bootstraps. It's literally a physical impossible thing. I've never actually heard an atheist use that. I mean, I understand the concept, but yeah, it's a physical impossibility. I don't know if it actually came from the film Baron Munchausen, or whether that just exemplified it. But yeah, I hope you guys understand what this means. No, I think that just exemplified it. What it means by pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. It basically means, imagine you were standing on the ground and you hold your bootstraps, your laces, and if you pulled on your laces hard enough, you could lift yourself up, because obviously you're lifting your feet. But no, there's other factors that would come into place, because you would fall straight on your backside. In reality, there's still gravity there. You're trying to act against gravity. It's not going to happen. Anyway, so there are a number of different ways that you can come at this. Again, it's all about raising that intellectual price tag. I'm hoping this is clear, that essentially for someone to argue that there was absolutely no cause, this makes absolutely no sense logically, it makes no sense scientifically, there is zero evidence for it, there is zero basis to think about it. It's literally just comes down to wishful thinking for anyone to argue this point. Okay, hope that is clear. So, which means that we have to, if we want to basically maintain our standards of rationality, of logic, of even following scientific principle, we have to conclude out of necessity that, yeah, there must be a cause. So our reality, our universe is real. It had a beginning, and there must have been some kind of a cause to that beginning, because any other option here makes absolutely no sense. Okay, so question 4. Was the cause itself? Could our reality have created himself, either from himself or nothing? If it's nothing, then something can come from that. They ask, where did God create the universe from? Okay, fine. So we'll come to that question, right? Where did God create the universe from? God creates by his majesty. Simple. At the end of the day, God is not. We'll come to it. I think that's either, we might come to it at the end of today or specifically tomorrow. But But that's a separate question, and that's going forward a little bit, because don't forget the title of this is the divine reality. We're not proving God here, and there's an important difference to understand why. Because not only do I not like to use the term God because it's loaded and it means different things to different people, but the knowledge of it, of whatever created our reality being a personal God, is something that you have to really get from scripture, that you can't automatically deduce from this. So to use this as an argument that, oh, there's God, there is a gap there, and we have to recognize that you can't just use this to just say, oh, then there is a God, because there is a gap there. We will cover that gap, but the best that we can explain right now is that no, there has to be something there that created our reality. We're building this up step by step, okay? So don't make the mistake of having a conclusion in your mind and trying to race to the conclusion that you actually trip and fall down at a particular point, and that people will use the point where you tripped as a reason to not believe in anything that you say. Take it slowly. Take it slowly. This argument here, we're only establishing that there must necessarily be some kind of a reality that is supernatural and transcendental to our reality, that necessarily brought our reality into existence, that also can't conform to the laws of nature, i.e. itself couldn't have been created, etc., etc. Okay? Right. So anyway, now question 4. So we've established here, did it have a cause? Yes. So what was the cause? Now, did it cause itself? It's yes or no. The ultimate point of this question, and you can word the question again differently, but it's really the source of the cause, whether the source of the cause is internal or external, okay? And which is basically, did it cause itself? So if it caused itself, then it was an internal cause, because if it didn't cause itself, then by definition, if it's not an internal cause, it must be an external cause. Does that make sense? The point is, the question is worded in such a way that from a logical perspective, the only potential answers to the question is one or the other. Okay, remember, again, we're going down to the deductive argument. So long as you've considered all of the possibilities and you've eliminated all of the implausible, whatever is left has to be the truth. So we're deliberately formulating the questions and the sequence of questions in such a way that the options are only one or the other, rather than a whole multitude. Because if there's a whole multitude, then we could leave ourselves open to someone saying, well, you forget to consider this possibility or that possibility. So we've structured this whole thing in such a way that it's only one or the other. It literally, by logical definition, cannot be anything else. So nobody is going to be able to come forth and say, well, you failed to consider XYZ possibility, because every single one of those possibilities is covered in these 5 questions. Okay, so did it cause itself? In other words, was the cause internal? Now, this is a one that atheists will like to say that yes, it did, because obviously they don't want to attribute an external cause. There's no evidence for an external cause from their perspective, whereas we obviously have our internal reality. So yes, it did cause itself. But then that brings about a logical contradiction, which they have yet to resolve, which is, if it caused itself, how did it exactly cause itself when our reality didn't exist such that it had to be created, and also then existed in order to create itself? I mean, which one was it? It's not even a case of the chicken or the egg, because in the chicken or the egg scenario, you have one or the other. In this case, you have something literally that exists and doesn't exist at the same time, which is similar to a woman giving birth to herself. I mean, how does she exist such that she's giving birth and simultaneously does not exist such that she's being born at the same time? We have, not only does it make no sense from a logical perspective, if it doesn't make sense from a logical perspective, then it also stands to reason, because science is also obviously built upon logical principles, that there is also no evidence for anything that has managed to create itself. Because again, just think about it. It's not there. So if it doesn't exist because it needs to be created, then how does it enact any kind of ability in order to perform the act of creation in and of itself? Does that make sense? Like it's literally a logical and a scientific impossibility for causes, for things like that, to just do things by themselves. There's literally no evidence, no basis for it. In fact, if you even want to take it one step further, right? I'll just give you this because we've got a little bit of time. One step further, which is the nature of creation, right? So the nature of creation is such that anything that we create in our reality is such that we actually don't create anything from scratch. All we can do is we can fashion one thing into another thing. Okay, so if you want a table, you have to take the pre-existing material, i.e. the wood from the tree or whatever have you, and you fashion it into a table. You literally can't create it out of thin air. And if you think back to every single thing that exists, all we're actually doing is taking something that already exists and fashioning it into something else. We take their energy from the sun, for example, and nutrients from the soil to create, photosynthesis and the soil, obviously, to create the trees and things like that in the first place. There's a process going on. So this is called creation ex materia, which is creation from material, where you're basically just transforming the state of material. To literally create from a state of nothingness, as in nothing was there and now there is something, creation ex materia, is impossible for our reality. There's a scientific maxim, which is that energy cannot be created nor destroyed. It can only be transformed from one form to another. And matter is a form of energy. Your tree, even though it's matter, it's a form of potential energy. You could burn it and release light, sound, heat, and things like that. So the point being that our universe, at no stage has it ever exhibited anything close to the ability for creation ex materia, creation from nothing. And they might say, well, what about the creation of the universe? So, this is a singular exception that they're attributing to the universe. There's no basis to attribute that to the universe and not an external cause. The consistent thing would be anything created is always created by an external cause. That's the scientific process. That's what happens with everything. Attribute that to the universe as well. There's no reason, there's no basis other than whim and desire why you would now switch and change the goalposts just at this point. It makes absolutely no sense. So again, just to recap now for question 4, did it cause itself? As in, can our reality have created itself? Could it have been there to be the cause for itself? It makes absolutely no sense for anyone to argue that yes, it could have done. It could have created itself. Okay, so the answer that we're forced to conclude is that no, our reality didn't cause itself, which necessitates there to be some kind of an external cause. Okay, now that we've established that there is some kind of an external cause that must have caused our reality, this is, by the way, this is an elongated version of the Kalam cosmological argument that we've covered further, but I've put my own little spice on it. Was that cause created? In other words, did that cause have some kind of a beginning or whatever have you, right? Because if they say, well, that cause didn't have a beginning, that cause was eternal, whatever have you, fine. From our perspective, alhamdulillah, that's what we believe to be the divine reality, that there was something necessarily that existed that created ours. So, which is ultimately where where we're going, but let's be intellectually honest and pose the question: was that cause created? Did that cause have a beginning? Because the atheist would want to posit that, oh no, there must have been some kind of if our reality was created, if our universe was created, then there must be some kind of a multiverse engine, some kind of a universe generating machine or whatever have you. So if that's what you're attributing as the cause, was that created? So again, only 2 possible answers, which is yes and no. Let's consider the yes option, that cause was created, that whatever created our reality, that cause, whatever that was a created thing as well, that had a beginning, that must have had some kind of an external cause, and basically all the questions go around. Essentially, for anyone to answer yes right here, they've not provided any ultimate or final solution. They've not come to any kind of conclusion. They've literally just added another chink to the chain of causality, and literally just gotten us nowhere. In fact, actually, rather than simplifying the explanation as per Occam's razor, they've actually now introduced something else that now needs to be accounted for. So the fun thing is with saying that, okay, our universe must have been caused by some kind of a multiverse generating machine or whatever have you, right? Okay, fine. where did the evidence for this come from now instead of just going for some kind of a simple explanation, which is okay, there must be some kind of a divine reality that created it, now you've invented this multiverse thing that now you've got to provide some kind of an explanation for, which obviously, by the way, a multiverse, a universe generator in and of itself has to be way more complicated than the universe in and of itself. They can't explain the origin of the universe. How are you going to explain where is the origin of this universe generating machine? Think about it. So for example, like, with a car, right? A car is obviously complicated, but you know what's more complicated than a car? The factory that built the car. The factory is a lot more complicated than the car itself. The car is just the product. So you can imagine that if our universe was just the product, and they can't explain that, how on earth now are you going to start explaining the multiverse, the universe generator, whatever you want to call it? You've not only not explained anything, you've just added another chink in the lane of causality, but you've actually now made the problem far more complicated for yourself. Because what are you going to come to next? That there's a universe factory generating factory. How far back and how eccentric are these explanations going to go? It just makes absolutely no sense. Again, you might also remember from that Dawkins video. What was Dawkins talking about? He's saying, well, okay, life could have started from aliens came to Earth and seeded life, and that's fascinating possibility and whatever have you. Yeah, okay. But then he also concludes that, well, they must have had to have started as well somehow, and they must have had to have evolved. So again, he's not coming to any kind of a conclusion as to, okay, what's at the beginning. He's just adding in extra complications, and it just leads to like an infinite regress of events. Because even if we accept, okay, fine, there was something else that something that caused our universe, that had a cause, and blah blah blah, and you have to go round and round and round. You can't go round and round, indefinitely, infinitely, because if you do that, you're creating an infinite chain of events. Which, if there was an actual infinite chain of events, then this current moment would not exist, because the arrow of causality could never reach this point. I hope this makes it, I hope this is clear. I know we're talking about a little bit of some abstract terms, but I hope that makes it clear that essentially it's impossible for there to be an infinite regress of events here as well, which means that, even if we accept, okay, fine, that reality had some kind of cause, at some point there has to be a stop where we say that no, there was a cause for our reality that by necessity, but the mere fact that our reality exists here today, it had to have been uncaused, right? By necessity. That's through logic, because we have the end conclusion, which is that we exist here. We are here. We are here. So there had to have been something, that otherwise you wouldn't have it. Which, so the only plausible option is to this question is that was that cause created? No. And this basically leads us to our conclusion that our reality, the state of existence that we find ourselves in, was caused by an uncaused cause. Now, I have some properties there. I'm not going to go into those today. That's going to be the subject for tomorrow, inshallah, same time, where we're going to go into the characteristics of the divine reality that we can conclude from this argument. But just to re-establish, for anyone now to try and attack this, to try and attack your conclusion, remember, they can't attack your conclusion directly, because the nature of argumentation is such that so long as your premises are correct and they logically flow, the conclusion flows necessarily. So someone, if they want to attack your argument, they have to attack one of the premises. So which premise are they going to attack? Are they going to attack the first one, which is, is our universe real? Fine, bring some kind of, they would have to bring some kind of evidence that this reality that we're experiencing, it's some kind of a simulation, whatever have you. They're not going to be able to do that, because for that, the evidence for that is transcendental, and it's just literally whim. There's no, again, Occam's razor, there's no basis to think that. There's no question or explanatory power that this thinking would actually resolve. So they have no basis to go. Okay. Then they might say, well, okay, no, I want to attack, this point about the universe having a beginning. Well, fine, okay, but if they want to do that, they're going to be on their own, because essentially the scientific consensus now is such that, well, no, our reality actually had a beginning. So are they now just unilaterally going against, pretty much the world's scientific body, and coming up with their own thing? Like, what's their basis for that? What's the evidence for that? Is it, again, just literally whims, wishful thinking? So they're not going to be able to support that. Okay, what about, did it have a cause? This would be the very first, if they say no, it didn't have a cause. Again, they need to come up with some kind of a better explanation. They can't just say it and be done with it. They have to provide an explanation that's more plausibly true. That's more plausibly true. It has to make sense. It has to be coherent. It has to provide explanatory power. And if they cannot provide an explanation that is coherent, more plausibly true, that provides explanatory power and doesn't create more problems, which they're not going to be able to, then they can't, still stick with this perspective. Again, this is how you're raising the intellectual price tag, that you're saying that the conclusions that you're drawing, it's more plausibly true. It's the simplest explanation. It covers all of the aspects, and it doesn't raise more questions. This idea of, oh, but where did God come from? Things like that. That's not a thing here. We're not talking about God. We're talking, this argument is only that something must necessarily exist that had to bring our reality in. Okay, they'll come to, well, where did that thing come from? Yani, if you're thinking, where did that thing come from? They haven't understood the conclusion. It necessarily existed. It had to always be there. Okay. In fact, that's exactly what this next slide is. So we can summarize this, this whole argument in this way. That, look, in the beginning, and beginning is there in quotes because time gets funny, the closer you get to T0, right? And I don't want to get you. I especially don't want you guys to get hung up in the semantics, because people can say, well, beginning means different things, blah 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 blah. We know what we mean, right? In the beginning, the very first state of existence, whatever have you. In the beginning, you have only two options. There was either nothing there, and we're talking about absolute nothingness. The very first point, the very first state, or however you want to call it, there was either absolute nothingness there, right? Or not that, something which is not nothing, right? There's only one of the two. Again, think about the way that this is worded. You either have absolute nothingness or not nothing. Okay, there's no in between. There's literally no in between. There's either a zero or something that's not zero. There's no gap for an in between. Now, if you had absolutely nothing, what's going to be the end conclusion of that? If there was absolutely nothing, then you're going to have absolutely nothing. Our reality would not and could not come into existence from nothing. There is no scientific or logical basis to believe in that. And no one is going to be able to bring anything forward, right? As my stream just died, because it's just died for me. I'm hoping you guys are still here. This is still broadcasting. Wait, let me just refresh it, because it just looked okay. Weird. It just looked a little bit weird here. I hope you guys are still with me. Right, okay. Still looks weird here. Right. So yeah, if you start from if there was nothing in the very beginning, you're gonna have absolutely nothing. Okay, cool, alhamdulillah. Right? So it just means go away, Google. Yeah, my camera's still working. Okay. Which means that because our reality is here, we can dismiss that as a possibility, which means that at the very beginning, there had to be something that necessarily existed, right? And this thing didn't come into existence. This thing is existence. Does that make sense? That this thing is whatever it is, and this is why we call it the divine reality, because it is the reality. It is real. It is what exists. And everything that we know, our universe, our reality, that is transient. That our reality is something that did not exist and was brought into existence and will cease to exist, right? This thing, obviously Allah, God, but we haven't got to that point to prove that. But, whatever it is, the divine reality is what necessarily existed. And without this thing existing, there could be nothing else. Does that make sense? Okay? So, from logical necessity, The only explanation that is completely coherent, provides explanatory power, is that there must be something that necessarily existed, that itself was uncaused, that brought everything else into the state of being, because any other possibility, any other option, from logic, from science, from everything that we know, the sum total of all of our experiences, all of our understanding of our reality, would lead to a point where our reality as we understand it now could not possibly exist. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. Right, let's deal with some very, very quick contentions and responses. Actually, we've done inside of an hour. All right. So, contention is that, okay, this is not scientific. Well, actually it is, because, okay, fine, it's not a scientific argument in the sense that we've done an experiment here, but science itself relies upon logic to come towards conclusions. Every single one of the stages on the way, we relied upon, science to understand, to validate our conclusions that we relied upon. But then ultimately, the conclusion of the exercise is a logical conclusion, which science relies upon. Science cannot go against logic. So it is scientific, right? And the question number one, by the way, is I hope don't, by the way, memorize the questions. Just try to understand where the questions are coming from. So the first thing is, our reality. Is our reality real? Well, from a scientific perspective, you can't deny that. Well, okay, fine. If it's real, did it begin to exist? From a scientific perspective, we can't deny that. Okay, did it have a cause? Again, from a scientific perspective, we can't attribute zero cause. Did it cause itself? Question number 4. From a scientific perspective, there's no way to say that, things just cause themselves. There always has to be an external cause, and every single experiment and everything that we know basically conforms to this. So where is the scientific explanation for how something can cause itself? It doesn't exist. And did that external cause itself? Well, then you just have logical necessity that says that no, it can't have, because you'll just have an infinite regress of events. Okay, and science, there's not going to be anything from science that's going to be able to experiment and tell you about how something, whether something from outside of our reality, whether that came into being, and how that worked. We've literally got an artificial glass ceiling there. We're not going to be able to go past our reality and work out what was going on beforehand. That makes sense. So it is absolutely scientific, and again, deductive logic provides more scope, supersedes it. Science is not the only path to truth, which is what we covered last week in our epistemology session as well. No scientist agrees. Again, this is a logical fallacy. It's a generalization. It's an appeal to authority. And here, when we're talking about scientists, you're talking about a scientist in the scientific perspective. Now, there's a brilliant documentary where that clip from Richard Dawkins came from, called Expelled, where, in fact, if you are a scientist, where scientism is such, the religion of science, where if you advocate anything supernatural or divine or whatever have you, you basically become ostracized, because the scientific community is such that they want to basically make science and or scientism and atheism synonymous with each other. So a scientist is not going to agree, because first and foremost, this is not within the realms of science to discuss, to come to some kind of a theological or supernatural conclusion, because again, science is limited in what it can talk about. It's bounded, it's got its limitations, and it cannot talk about something that's beyond that. They're not going to be able to say that whilst wearing the hat of a scientist. So again, it's an appeal to authority, which is an incorrect authority as well as a generalization. You can't have a naturalistic based proof that encompasses something that's supernatural in its nature. What if someone said, yes, the universe began to exist without a cause because we don't have any evidence for the cause of a universe? That's fine, but then you would say that every single thing that we know that began to exist had a cause. Every single thing that began to exist has a cause. Give me an example of something that doesn't have a cause. So not only do they have a problem, logically explaining how can something begin without a cause, because how are they going to logically explain that? They're just going to say, oh, well, it just did. They also have no evidence of actually anything that did do that. So in the absence of any logical explanation or any scientific evidence or evidence of any kind that demonstrates that happened, why are they choosing that option rather than going with the option that conforms to everything else that we know? That, because it began to exist, there must be some kind of an external cause. which is out of necessity transcendental to the subject itself. So some kind of a supernatural cause which is transcendental to our reality. The question comes down to why are they picking that option? Again, you're raising the intellectual price tag that the option that they're picking is now not from, they're not choosing this option because it's logically sound or scientifically sound or whatever have you. They're literally now becoming dogmatic in their positions, and they're going for the option that they actually have no basis for, only because it conforms to their foregone conclusion, the conclusion that they want, which is exactly the type of thinking that they criticize religious people for. So the same thing that they criticize religious people for, that, like God of the gaps, whatever have you, literally sticking in like science of the gaps, if they want to say it. Like it's a thing, but they just don't want to recognize it because they, there's a lot of them, they're not well versed in any kind of philosophy or how to understand them to make an argument point, because there's no evidence for the cause. There doesn't need to be an evidence for the cause. Just because there's no evidence of cause does not mean that there isn't a cause, right? And it's not that there's no evidence for the cause, there's no evidence that we've managed to detect. And here's the point, that presumes also that we would have the ability to detect that. We can't detect anything beyond the creation of the universe. Like, for example, are you able to experience history beyond the point where you were born, or beyond the point where you'd pass away? I mean, before you were born or after you pass away? No, you can't, because you have a natural barrier there. Like, it's impossible for you to experience that on a one-to-one basis. So just because, now you can say, well, you don't have the experience of anything that happened before you were born, doesn't mean that nothing happened there. Again, that's a logical fallacy here. I hope that makes sense. So another contention, we don't know how things started. Again, appeal to ignorance. Doesn't matter if you don't know or not. Out of necessity, something must have been there. Okay, there is no first cause. Again, that just appeals to infinite regress, which ultimately denies our existence, because we're here. The fact that we're here means that the arrow of time, the arrow of causality, however you want to term it, actually had to traverse an infinite series of events that happened before this moment for this moment to ever materialize. Okay, first cause created itself, self-creation, illogical and plausible. We've covered a lot of these. Our reality evolved. This is one I've heard as well, which made absolutely no sense to me. Evolved from what? What does that mean? Evolved. Like, evolution is change, but change from what? It doesn't explain the origin. Again, it's the same issue with with life, where, okay, fine, you can say, okay, human beings and all of life, whatever have you, evolved, but yeah, explain where life actually started. Where did chemistry turn into biology? Where did a rock suddenly become sentient? Like, there's no explanation there. You can't just skip over that and just say, oh, we'll come back to that, because skipping over these very, very important fundamental questions just because you want to get to a predetermined conclusion doesn't mean that your predetermined conclusion is going to be any more sound. You've literally, you've fallen over at the first hurdle. You're literally disqualified from the race at the first hurdle. You can't say, well, I got to the finish line, that, oh yeah, I win, that this makes sense. No, mate, you literally fell over at the first hurdle. You've got no explanation here, so you can't claim that any kind of superiority just because you literally just walked to the finish line over any other competing explanations that may have done things that you don't like, i.e. within the rules, even within your rules, but just because you don't like it, you don't want to conform to the conclusion. At the end of the day, that's dogmatism, which is ironically the exact thing that that theists are accused of. Anyway, universe was created by multiverse. Yeah, multiverse still requires an originator and a greater explanation. And who created the first cause? The first cause wasn't created. Again, it's necessity. Oh, so here's another example that just comes to mind as well, how I used to explain this. When people say, well, what caused the first cause? What is north? Think about this now. What is north of the North Pole? Think about it. Like, if you start walking north, right, you'll hit the North Pole. Why? If you keep walking, well, you can't. There is nothing north of the North Pole. By definition, everything is south. People have to understand, when we're talking about literally the first cause or something that exists necessarily, they have to, expand their mind to consider that the default state of existence is not that there was absolute nothingness. The default state of existence through necessity is that there had to be something that necessarily existed, and therefore that necessary existence, that is actually reality. That is actually what is real, which is why the section is called the divine reality. I hope that makes sense. Right. How can you demonstrate that logic is not dependent on science or is not bound by space and time? Simple, because logic is abstract, whereas science is based upon naturalism. Science is based on, science is based upon naturalism. Science is based upon, things that you can measure, things that are empirical, and space and time are empirical entities. You can measure space, you can measure time. Whereas logic, logic is for the most part, it's abstract. And you don't have any example of anything happening, where science has managed to break the rules of logic. What science may have done is exposed a flaw in our understanding of the rules of logic, but it hasn't broken the rules of logic. It's only just, exposed and fine-tuned our understanding of what the rules of logic are. But the rules of logic are the rules of logic. That's how our reasoning is based. And if we can't trust our reasoning, we have no basis on which to trust anything. Does that make sense? I hope so. So, that is all we have time for. Well, actually, no, we do have time. There is a longer version of this, but I don't think I want to go into that right now because it's almost, there's a lot of repeat. That's quite heavy. Plus, I don't want to exhaust my speaking ability and make myself too thirsty. Cool. Jazakallah khair. So, if are there any other questions? Let me just come back to the slide. So again, this video will be on YouTube, up on YouTube shortly, inshallah. Again with the slides and whatever have you. Be very grateful if you guys could share it and let people know. Inshallah, tomorrow we will go through now that we understand it. So obviously I've come through, I've explained very briefly some necessary characteristics that obviously this divine reality has to have necessarily existed, and yada yada yada. Some other things that we can determine through conceptual analysis, through by just thinking about it, that properties that this divine reality must necessarily have. So we'll go through that tomorrow, all the different properties, and from there we will segue into the Quran next week, and we will show how basically the Quran alludes to many of these, references them and things like that. So there is a segue to take that. How do we know that the first cause is God? So literally, so we know that this first cause is just some kind of a divine reality, right? We'll come ultimately. Will we come to this tomorrow? So we know that this first cause is, and we'll probably discuss tomorrow. But to answer the question, we know that there's some kind of divine reality that created us for something. We know it's intelligent. It must have created us for some kind of a purpose. But for us to know what that purpose is, we have to basically refer back to it. We can't understand what our purpose is from conceptual analysis alone. So anyone who comes with this idea of, I'll just think about, I'll just define my own purpose of life, you can't do that. You have a look at anything that's around you right now, the books, your monitor, fan, whatever have you. Anything that was created, did it define its own purpose, or was it the creator of the thing that defined its purpose? And you'll find it's always the creator of the thing that defined its own purpose. So us being creation as well, we follow the same, and we have to refer back to the creator to understand what our purpose is. But that's a segue, it's a jump that we'll come to tomorrow, inshallah. Why must the uncaused be one as opposed to multiple uncauses? Excellent question. We're going to discuss that tomorrow. That's the properties and characteristics of the divine reality, inshallah. Today, all for today that we've done is just establish that from a logical, from a scientific, from pretty much every single perspective, that there has to be a divine reality for anything to make sense. That literally atheism has, doesn't even have his foot in the door. The door is slammed shut in the face of atheism if you follow and understand, epistemology, the rules of logic, just even your own surroundings properly. The only way that that atheists actually, well, actually, it doesn't have any chance, right? People that toot it, whatever have you, literally have some kind of huge, major flaw in their understanding of reality or logic or something like that, which you just need to expose just by through questioning and asking them to come to an explanation for X, Y, and Z. And again, don't get distracted. This argument is sufficient for you to be able to poke a hole in their entire worldview. Remember, from our very first session, we just want them to have a different worldview, to experience our worldview. Your objective to them would be like, well, okay, fine. So you have your worldview of atheism, which has got so many holes and gaps, and it lacks explanatory power, whatever have you. Try on our worldview. Just have a look at reality from the mindset, from the position of Islam as a Muslim, that there is a divine creator, reality, and now do you not see that everything now starts to make sense, that there is now purpose behind everything, that everything becomes coherent and things like that, like you're not just looking at things one dimensionally, that you're looking at things rather holistically, and the whole thing starts to fit together. That's the point. And again, just to remind you what Brother Hamza said, I'm going to actually just replay that again, but turn off the mic just so you guys can hear it properly, because I don't know if that played properly the first time, but the reminder is apt now. So let me just play that again.
Bro, don't forget to remind people that all these abstract arguments, for them to understand that they're here to worship Allah, to know Him, to love Him, to obey Him, and to direct and single out all acts of worship to Him alone. Do you know what I mean?
So I hope that's clear. At the end of the day, from the Islamic perspective, our iman should be increasing here. That we should, start to get some kind of sense of the majesty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right, okay. Why can't the end cause be mechanical? We will discuss that tomorrow, inshallah, for properties and characteristics of the creator. What does explanatory power mean? Explanatory power means that the what you're using to explain, the way that you explain something, can and actually does explain what you're talking about. Right? So let's just pick some kind of a really absurd example that I'm just going to think of. What if I was to come outside of my house and I saw that there was a car on my roof, right? An actual car on my roof of my house, right? 2-story building, 3-story building. And if I ask someone and say, like, how did a car get up on my house? And they say, oh, a cat did it, right? A little cat. Like that provides no explanatory power, because, how on earth is this little cat going to explain how a car got up there? Does that make sense? Whereas if they say, no, what we mean cat, we mean caterpillar, construction machinery, whatever have you, that there was a crane that lifted up the car and did it. Oh, fine, that explains it, because now we understand, yeah, the crane has the ability to lift those kinds of loads or whatever have you. Explanatory power just means that your explanation, it explains things, and it doesn't leave gaps. It doesn't cause more questions, right? So, for example, the multiverse, origin of our universe, the multiverse. The multiverse has no explanatory power other than to posit or posit a potential source, right? But it doesn't resolve any questions in terms of, it doesn't satisfy our intellectual curiosity, because now it's just raised more questions. Well, okay, this multiverse machine now, or whatever it must, but out of necessity, be way more complex than the universe. Where did that come from? Who designed that? What's maintaining that? Where are all the other universes going? Are there parallel universes? Blah 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 blah. Does that make sense? Okay, so explanatory power just means that basically when you explain something, it has to make sense. Okay, so I hope that makes sense to everyone. If not, we will call it a day there. Let's see. Yes, we will call it a day there if there's no more questions. So again, this will be up on YouTube. Please do share the link when that's out. Let your friends, family, people know so they can join the next sessions, inshallah, because now we're starting to get into the actual meeting content, and at the end of the day, don't forget, this is first and foremost, don't forget your intentions for giving dawah, that this is for us to come closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as well as to be able to explain to others that don't use this argument now to just bash people over the head, but rather, to have a debate with them and to argue with them, because, as it's shown you, it's really, really easy to do, but rather gently question them and expose the flaws in their reasoning, in their understanding of how reality is, and invite them basically to view reality through the eyes of the Muslim, and inshallah they will prefer that. But otherwise, I will see you again tomorrow at the same time, same place, and we will go through the properties and characteristics of the divine reality. Jazakallahu khairan for joining. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.